Jim's asked me to talk briefly about how it was that I came to write Seattle 1919 and record it, and what I think about music and social movements, which is something that I now don't do as much, but teach about and write about. So I wanted to tell you a little about how it came to be. I grew up in a home that was filled with music and with progressive politics. Those were two things always in my home, and so I think it was inevitable that at some point they came together. In the late 1970s, I found myself in Santa Barbara, California. I was going to graduate school there, and I was playing rock and roll in a garage band, which was a good combination. Sort of the two things seemed to balance each other out. I was studying political consciousness, that is, how people come to have the ideas that they have about their political world, about their social world. I was especially interested in how taking part in great events, strikes, rebellions, that sort of thing, how that affected people after the event was over. Did it change the way they thought about the world? And so I had become interested in the Seattle General Strike because, as I think is clear from other things you've heard, I think that the Seattle General Strike was the single most radical event in US history. And I say that because there aren't that many general strikes in our history, very few, but there's only one in which workers went beyond a first very difficult step of shutting down an entire city, to a second step of taking over the city and running the city. And because it was such an amazing event, so radical, I thought that interviewing General Strike participants and observers would help me understand how these great events affect political consciousness. But at the same time, I was very taken with the feeling of the strike itself. The more that I read about it, in the beginning I was just reading about it, the more I felt like the emotions of the strikers were very much like the emotions that I and other people who had taken part in the great social movements of the 60s and the 70s. Those were very similar emotions to me. And I felt the tug of those emotions and of what it is to be involved in an event that you think is maybe changing the world. And so I started writing songs about the strike, rock and roll songs, because I thought that the attitude of the strike, the audacity, the energy, the desire to change the world, that feeling seemed to me very similar to the feelings that I found in the rock and roll that I love best. That is, the rock and roll that seemed to be about changing the world in those days. And as I wrote more and more about the strike, I started thinking of it as not just a collection of songs, but instead as some sort of thing that went together, as an opera. Now, I want to be honest. On the one hand, I had a very conscious political strategy. I had a plan. I believed that the General Strike contained not just an historical something or other, but lessons that were important for those of us at that time and in this time, for progressives and labor activists to think about what had happened and why it had happened. And yet I thought this history is almost completely unknown, even in Seattle. And I thought that by writing a rock opera and recording it, that maybe I could introduce this event and the ideas and the lessons of that event to people in a non-coercive way, in an entertaining way, and maybe people would think about some of these things. So that was my conscious plan, my political strategy. But once I began the process, it took on a life of its own. As I worked on my academic work, on a thesis about the strike, songs kept popping into my head, demanding to be written. You know, I would work until late at night in the university, and then I'd get on my bike and I'd ride home, and I'd get into this rhythmic writing, and You know, by the time I was home, there'd be a new song there because the combination of the two. But when I came to Seattle in the late 70s to start interviewing people who had been here during the strike, who had been participants in the strike, and to look at archival materials from the strike, then the strike completely took over my musical life. And everything seemed to be material for the strike. So I can remember very well sitting in the archives in the basement of Suzzallo Library at the UW, going through the Union Record, the labor paper of the time, and among other things, for the first time reading in its entirety, I had seen parts of it, but reading in its entirety, Anna Louise Strong's great editorial 2 days before the strike, No One Knows Where. Some of you are familiar with that. I see the nodding, but I'm going to, for those of you who are not, let me read you a couple paragraphs. Not the withdrawal of labor power, but the power of the workers to manage will win this strike. Labor will not only shut down the industries, but labor will reopen under the management of the appropriate trades such activities as are needed to preserve public health and public peace. If the strike continues, labor may feel led to avoid public suffering by reopening more and more activities under its own management. And that is why we say that we are starting on a road that leads no one knows where. And I read that, and I went home that afternoon, and I wrote a song called One Step Further, which describes that moment when Strong and other people in the city realized that this strike was something else, that it wasn't just enough to shut it down, they're going to have to open it up again.
I don't care about the government. Think Rockefeller owns the president. Just a shugging for the millionaires. Just one way we're gonna get our share. That's right. You see it happening all over town. There's a new way of thinking that's going around. People seeing that the way to win is going one step further than we've ever been. I'm not talking about the demonstration. I'm not talking about the negotiating. I'm talking about taking the bull by the balls
Yeah, all glory to Anna Louise Strong. I can remember interviewing a guy named Earl George, some of you may know, at the Longshoremen's Hall. I think it was on Union Street down by the waterfront. And I was a pretty young man then, and I was overwhelmed with the history and the romance of it all. And there we were sitting in this ancient hall, and you could hear the seagulls and the foghorn coming through the windows. And he was telling me about being in the strike. And I said to him, "Did it change your life?" And he said, "It made me a class-conscious warrior." And I said to him, "Well, Mr. George, what was it like in Seattle when the strike started?" And he said, "Nothing moved but the tide." And the words were not even out of his mouth, and I thought, that's a song, and I went right home, and I wrote that song.
I was born outside of Bainbridge. I grew up in the gold rush days. My daddy ran a tavern there out by Bristol Bay. And I heard the miners talking about a new world that was coming. And I believe I see that new world coming today. It said, "Boy, you listen closely. There's a secret that we know. They won't teach you this in schoolhouse. They won't tell you. Without our brain, nothing would ever go. We run it all. We run it all. Nothing moves in the city unless we say so. Let the bosses curse. Let the papers cry. Still can be, except for the wagons bearing the sign, exempt by the strike committee. And the strike committee, yes, my friends, that's no one but you and me. And I believe I see that new world coming today. Nothing moves in the city unless we say so. Let the bosses curse. Let the papers cry. Let them cry. This morning I saw it happen with these ancient guys of mine. Without our say so, nothing moves but the tide.
Over the next 5 years, I spent a lot of time with my friend and writing partner, Mike Ross, and we finished 40 songs about the strike. We eventually picked 21 that we thought told the story the best and rounded up a band. And we we spent 2 years rehearsing and recording the album. It's never made the charts, to say the least, but it's the corporate charts, yeah. But it's never gone away completely. Over the last 2 decades, I don't think there's ever been a time when more than a couple of months have gone by without someone contacting me about the album or about the strike. And I take that not so much as a comment on the album as with a continuing fascination with this really unprecedented demonstration of solidarity and militancy and radicalism that once people hear about it, they want to hear more about it. I think music has a role to play, an important role to play in our struggles to change the world. Under the right circumstances, I think it can reach out and educate us about issues and struggles that we don't know anything about. Under the right circumstances, I think it can reach beyond education and help to bring us in to actually doing something about these issues and struggles. Under the right circumstances, I think it can help mobilize us, get us to do a little bit more than we would have done otherwise. Under almost any circumstances, I think it helps to play an important role for those who are already committed. It's a comfort in the hard times. It's a memory in the lean times. It's a celebration in the times of victory. It's not a magic bullet. Music can't substitute for the hard work of organizing, but it can be a part of that organizing. One of my favorite old folkies, Artie Traum, who died this past year, summed it up in the liner notes of an album that he released with his brother in the late 1960s. Music, he wrote, thrives on our energy, draws our hope, purges and soothes us. It is our life, but not our solution, a small part, perhaps. Thank you.
What's that?
It's a book.
Well, what's that?
It's a non-volatile storage medium. It's very rare. You should have one.
Stop it!
It's the end of the world as we know it. I feel fine.
Good morning, slaves, and welcome to another edition of It's the End of the World as We Know It and I Feel Fine, a safe home for seals and ducks. I am your host, the Stimulator, and in news of the money of the tar sands, looks like the karma train has paid another visit to those high-pollutant capitalists at Syncrude. Seems that the nasty sludge that's produced by the process of extracting oil out of mud kills ducks. Over 500 cute birdies landed in a so-called tailings pond, and nearly all will die as a result of their bad choice in landing place. This little disaster could cost the company millions of dollars in fines and a lawsuit. Here's Alberta's Premier Ed Stelmach.
We mean business when it comes to the rules and regulations we have in place with respect to protection of environment.
Yeah, right. As I reported on the show last year, environmental groups have called the tar sands
the most destructive project on Earth.
Pictures of the oil ducks have tarnished Canada's image around the world, but not as much as these pictures. Yep, you know you're in trouble when PETA's on your butt. The People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals is focusing attention on Canada's yearly slaughter of hundreds of thousands of cute baby seals by calling on the Vancouver Olympic Organizing Committee, or VANOC, to help stop this bullshit. More on the Vancouver Olympics after the break. It seems baby seals are not the only ones taking a beating. Crazy wildfires have been burning up the state of Victoria in Australia, and experts say that man-made global warming is partly to blame.
We need to send a message to Congress and the President that we want them to take the actions that are needed to preserve climate for young people and future generations and all life on the planet.
That was NASA scientist James Hansen, exhorting people to head down to DC on March 2nd. Thousands are expected to protest coal energy in Washington, D.C. in a massive act of civil disobedience. Capitol Climate Action aims to direct protesters to block access to the Capitol power plant in D.C. We'll let you know if this nonviolent action has any effect on runaway climate change, or if it changes Obama's stance on so-called clean coal. On a less peaceful front, the fearless eco-warriors at Sea Shepherd battle with Japanese whalers once again by ramming their boat, the Steve Irving, against these motherfucking whale killers. Now, if we could only get those Sea Shepherds to join forces with the Somali pirates. And finally, FBI informant Andrew Darst, who is expected to testify against the RNC-8, was arrested after he broke into a house and beat up 2 men. Darst, who was better known as Panda, now faces assault and burglary charges. The St. Paul Popo are now worried that his credibility as a snitch may be compromised. I often wonder how the IRA would have handled a situation like this. Alright, I'm upsetting with y'all. Let's try this again. This one goes out to all you snitches out there.
Ready or not, here I come. You can't hide. Gonna find you and take it slowly. Ready or not, here I come. You can't hide. Gonna find you and make you want me.
Once again, my inbox has been flooded with all kinds of mail and comments. I wish I could hire 1,000 monkeys to get back to y'all, but I'll do my best in this brand new section called Reply to All. First off, several people have been asking me what my stance on violence is, since I have reported on several riots lately, and because of my choice of video samples from fictitious 1970s movies. While I have never exhorted anyone to commit violent acts on my show, I do respect people's rights to self-defense. Also, I do not consider destruction of inanimate objects to be violence.
Why are you destroying the tea?
We're protesting unfair taxation. Parliament raised the tea tax over our objections.
In this short format, I cannot begin to scratch the surface on this discussion, but there are whole books written on the subject. So read Ward Churchill's Pacifism as Pathology, or Peter Gelderloo's How Nonviolence Protects the State, or you can just wait for my film NCIV to come out. I've also been getting a few mea culpas from Obama supporters who did not take my advice and wasted their time campaigning for that corporate whore. Jeremiah in Atlanta wrote,
I was just doing what seemed like the best I could do at the time. Which, come to think of it, it's exactly the problem. Maybe I'm one of Ward Churchill's little Eichmanns. Man, that doesn't feel good. I'm quickly coming to realize that no change is actually going to happen.
You know, I don't want to be the guy that says, I told you so, but I told you so. In almost exactly a year from this broadcast, an event with brutal environmental and human rights consequences will descend upon my hometown. Most people call them the 2010 Winter Olympic Games. I call them
the 5 cock rings of death.
To commemorate the 1-year countdown
to the 5 cock rings of death,
the motherfucking resistance held a flag-burning ceremony and anti-Olympic torch relay in downtown Vancouver. Pissed-off residents expressed their feelings about this corporate-sponsored takeover of our streets.
Vancouver is a great city, or should I say at least used to be. There used to be maybe 500 to 1,000 people sleeping on the streets. Today we have around 3,000 in the Lower Mainland. I think $1 billion spent on an athlete's village would have been better off spent on single occupancy rooms.
But you are probably wondering, why would anyone be against what is supposed to be a display of international sportsmanship? To find out, I spoke with Alyssa Westergaard Thorpe of the Olympic Resistance Network. Hey Alyssa, why the fuck are you opposed to the Olympics?
The Olympic Resistance Network organizes under the banner of No Olympics on Stolen Native Land in recognition of the fact that these are occurring on unceded native land. Additionally, we're concerned about the environmental destruction. Supposedly these are the green games, but they're actually going to be one of the most destructive games in modern games history, next to Beijing probably. There's also the concerns about economic waste during what is a housing and poverty crisis in British Columbia, concerns about the criminalization of poverty, and concerns about the restrictions on the right to dissent. All of these issues, in addition to many more about how the community is negatively affected by the Olympics, are what we're united around. We're united in interests of anti-colonialism, anti-oppression, and for the interests of the people in the community, which VANOC and the city aren't concerned about.
What kinds of security bullshit should we expect?
Well, there has been attempts to meet with people, harassment, intimidation by the police, surveillance of activist groups, and attempts to recruit infiltrators throughout BC. Reports of it recently in Victoria, reports of it in the greater metro area, and definitely here in Vancouver. Last month, we were speaking out at City Hall against their plans to restrict our ability to protest and reduce our charter rights to free expression. And police were actually listening as public addressed the council about those issues. Then they targeted people that they considered to be Olympic opponents, myself included, and waited for us outside of City Hall so they could give us their business cards, to remind us that they're watching us, that they know who we are, and to request private meetings with our activist groups.
And how much money are these pigs planning to spend on security?
The security budget is a tightly guarded secret, like so much of VANOC's planning. They're not being transparent or public about that at all, as they're supposed to do. It's going to be at least $1 billion, but that's actually an underestimate if you look at past games. If you look at the London Games, their budget is at least twice that, just for security. So I think even the $1 billion price tag that's been floating around will be an underestimate. Also, the number of troops and police that they're talking about is also an underestimate. They're saying more than 20,000, but history shows, as in the Sydney Games, they had something like 35,000 police and 4,000 commando troops just for their games. That was 4 police for every athlete.
Thanks, Alyssa. And that about does it for this edition of It's the End of the World as we know it and I feel fine. To comment on this show or for the links about the evil ways of the 5 cock rings of death, just visit my website, stimulator.tv. Now go for the gold.